Thank you so much, Dr. Beau Lotto. One lesson I have learned today is that our perception of the world is dependent both on experience and context. If we want to improve our capacity to innovate, especially in these difficult times, we need to learn how to see with different eyes. That's my learning. Thank you very much. Señoras y señores, hoy más que nunca, en estos tiempos de crisis, necesitamos encontrar nuevos caminos para avanzar hacia un nuevo modelo productivo basado en la ciencia, en la tecnología, en el conocimiento y en la innovación. Para ello, debemos estar atentos a las nuevas oportunidades que nos rodean, lo que a menudo significa cambiar la forma en la que percibimos las cosas y tratar de salirnos fuera de la caja. Cambiar nuestra percepción del mundo es una oportunidad para ver, para hacer las cosas de forma diferente. En definitiva, es una oportunidad para innovar. En Euskadi creemos que ya estamos haciendo algo de esto, de alguna manera. Y por eso hoy en el escenario contamos con personas y organizaciones que son buena muestra de ello. Es por eso que ahora a los invitados, Arkaitz, Cristina, Carlos y Leire, os voy a ir cediendo la palabra para que de alguna manera podáis describir muy brevemente vuestra actividad y contribución, a la vez que os doy la oportunidad y os invito a seguir preguntando al doctor Lotto sobre esta materia, sobre este cambio de modelo que estamos proponiendo. Arkaitz, si te parece, es tu turno para empezar con el turno de cuestión.
Bueno, arratsaldeon, voy a dirigirme en inglés para poder preguntar a Beau Lotto. ¿Tenéis traductores? Si no, luego repito la pregunta. First of all, I'm a scientist, so I am coming from the research part. I have a laboratory in Eitb, which is a research institute in the technology park in Zamudio. We do cancer research. We try to understand how cancer cells function. And for this, we try to put forward questions that are relevant to the disease. We apply for projects, we get funding, and we try to translate knowledge into applications. After the talk of Dr. Lotto, I think that I need to rethink how my lab works and maybe go back a few steps, get a few kids and get the right questions, because I think he just highlighted that sometimes we are inside a very narrow focus of what we do. So in that sense, one thing that is clear is that most of you don't know me. Many of you don't know Eitb, and this is because science doesn't get as efficiently to people. And with this goes my question. So you are showing that we need to translate science to people, that science is about curiosity, that everyone has a scientist inside. What do you think is the benefit of doing this translation, of this disclosure of science to people, and how does it get revenues for scientists?
That's a very good question. How does it get revenue in terms of funding, or it depends on what your intention is when you want to communicate science. My interest in communicating science is I want to use science to get people to see the world differently, as well as inform my own research. So my lab is a public lab. So it was in the London Science Museum for 2 years. We're now starting, hopefully, a nightclub where everything in the space is an experiment. Why would we do that? If you want people to understand your research, you have to do two very simple things. You have to make it relevant, and you have to make them part of it. And so people don't just learn about science, they actually become the scientists. The children weren't learning about science, they were literally scientists. But they were scientists in the way that I think about science, which is about asking questions. So I try to engage the public with science to get them to have a better understanding of the process of science, but also to use that as a skill to then take on to their own life. That's one reason. The other is advance my science itself. So if I want to understand human behavior, I need to be able to research people in the real world, not in the lab. The lab is just a theater. People behave in the lab according to what they think is supposed to happen, the way they think they're supposed to behave. So I'm able to do research on thousands of people from all over the world at different ages. And so I'm able to better understand what it is to be human by actually doing my research in the public space. So those are the reasons why I do it. I don't like the idea that the way we engage with people in science is what's called the information deficit model. The more information I provide, the more they'll understand. That's actually the strategy that climate science has been taking. And that's not a good strategy. We have to actually translate science and to make it meaningful to people, not give them information, because information is pointless. We have to give them value and meaning in what we're saying. And also, I should say that experts are the worst ones to ask questions, right? Because we know the questions we're not supposed to ask, right? I'm a huge fan of being naive, not ignorant, but naive. What's amazing is experts are brilliant at recognizing a good question. The novices are very good at asking questions, but not recognizing the ones that are good.
So what do you think is the skill that you would ask a scientist? What do you implement in science for it to be better, more efficient?
What's the skill for scientists? What's the skill for asking a good question? That's a really hard question. I don't know the answer to that. It's the honest one. But I can make one up. What is a good question? So we have some thoughts about what a good question is. A good question is one that leads on to more questions. A good question that leads on to an answer and no more questions is a bad one, right? The best questions tend to be very simple. So when we work with children, their first instinct is to ask a really complex question because they think that will be intelligent, that's interesting. But what you teach them is actually it's the simplest one. The one that actually was the assumption underlying their question that is far more interesting. So when we work with corporations or actually even in the lab, diversity of groups is hugely important. We know that a highly diverse group can be much more effective than a highly trained, very narrow group. Why? Because the people are actually challenging each other's assumptions unintentionally. And then it's about creating that space where asking questions is a good thing, where play is a good thing.
Okay, so thank you, Arkait, for your question. Thank you both for your answers. Now, let's move to the technology domain. Cristina Ollón, si te parece, desde el ámbito tecnológico.
Muy bien, gracias, Carlos. Arratsaldeon, good evening. I work at Esprit, the business development agency of the Basque country. I work in the area that supports the Basque government in the definition and implementation of research and development policies that aim to improve the competitiveness of the Basque industry by means of incorporating technology. So as Carlos said, I'm representing technology today here. Well, now that I'm confused after your presentation, you already said that technology is a tool, which I like because, well, technology is nowadays so easily introduced in our daily lives that it may seem, or we may have the perception that is obvious to introduce it in the products and services our companies deliver, which is not. And on the other hand, sometimes also we perceive technology as an end, as an end in itself, and not as a means to add value to our products and services, or the products and services of our companies. And you already said that technology is a tool, and after listening to your presentation, I like very much this idea of science being a signal of uncertainty. And it occurs to me that maybe technology is a way to put some certainty into science. So it's like the evolution of scientific knowledge towards more a more certainty domain when we poor human beings work in a more safe environment. Well, it was not the question that I was supposed to ask, but after your presentation, yeah, I would like to see if you agree that technology could be like this idea of putting certainty into science.
Yes. I think
Thank you. Very easy.
So when I emphasize creativity, I just want to make it clear that I'm only emphasizing creativity because we have such an emphasis on efficiency. So we have to change the balance a bit, at least to make it balanced. But I'm not suggesting that we should all become creative, right? What's really intelligent is to be able to move between them, because innovation is the balance of them. So as I say, if a bus is coming at you, you don't want to stand there thinking, I wonder if there's a different way I can see this, right? You want to get out of the way as fast as possible. You want to be efficient. The problem is that we seem to treat everything as if it's a bus coming at us. So it's knowing when we should be a bit more creative versus being much more efficient. So I think that in that sense, technology can be, we have an idea and then we can translate that and to make life much more efficient, of course. The problem is we then take that lesson that we've learned and we get a new problem and we try to apply the same lesson to that new problem. And it might work and it might not. It's actually called a metaphor in the case of the brain. When we go into a new search space, we apply the rules that we learned before and we say, it's as if this, right? That's a metaphor. What we then want to do is actually challenge that metaphor, that rule, and come up with the new relationships that exist. So I think that's the problem, is we can have technology that makes things very efficient. That's a solution. We then get a new problem, and we apply the old solution, and we keep doing that. And eventually, the irony is we become increasingly inefficient. So we have to always come back to the questions and then become efficient again. So it's a cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Beau, again. And now let's move to the opposite side of the stage and now move to the business world. No? Carlos Luna, Director General de Angulas Aguinaga.
Well, I do speak un poquito of English. I'll try to do my best. Thanks a lot for your presentation. It has been very exciting and very interesting for me and for my company. Just a few words about my company. We belong to the food industry. We do produce fish products, not jellyfish yet, but we'll study about it. And we love to take risks and to play with innovation. Every year we launch many new products. We do produce very modern packagings, very convenient products, and we do invest a lot on publicity. But every year it's more difficult to understand the consumer. Consumer is changing, and it's changing very quick in a way that the traditional marketing knows nothing about the new consumer. So I think it's crucial for companies to change the way we look at the consumer, and we have to understand consumer perceptions. This is the future for marketing, let's say for the consumer goods industry, I think. I would like you to ask you a couple of questions. I know that you are collaborating with Purpose Consultant, that is a very well-known branding company in UK. But which kind of demands do you get from, let's say, medium-sized companies? How can you help this? What they are asking to you?
Well, really, a lot of what you're just saying is that they want to better understand their audience. So if we think about branding, so yes, we have a company in London called Beautiful Mind, which is a relationship between my lab and a branding consultant, the top branding consultant in the UK. And so we created this company called Beautiful Mind to basically address this question. If you want to do, what is branding for? Branding is about creating a relationship with your audience. That's really what it's about. It's about telling a story that's meaningful. If you want to establish a relationship, past marketing strategies we know don't work because they try to understand people as the average. So imagine having a relationship, imagine having a romantic relationship with your partner and treating him or her as if they were the average man or woman, right? Surprisingly, it would work quite well, right? Because we're all actually quite average, right? We don't like to think that, but we're pretty much variations of a theme. That's why I knew you were going to do Kiki and Boo Boo, right? But to know someone is to know how they deviate from being normal. And that's what branding and trying to understand the consumer is about. So that's why we know market research doesn't actually work, because you don't establish a meaningful relationship. And we understand what it means for the brain to establish a relationship. And so that's how we work with companies, is understanding the stories and the narrative that they can tell in order to understand their audience and establish a relationship with them.
Are you speaking about emotions?
Emotions, but also when we actually work with them, we don't give them answers. We call them, instead of a workshop, we call it labs. We actually do research. So they ask the questions, because as scientists, we're practiced at asking questions and then designing experiments to come up with the answers. And then the research we do is actually in the public space as an experiential event, because brands increasingly want to create experiences for people, right?
Yes, and just to finish, another question. For instance, let's say in a medium-sized company, how can we start with this philosophy of how to change the way we look at the consumer, how to implement the perception philosophy?
By calling beautiful mind.
Yeah. Please give me your card.
No, it's a good question. It's a long answer, but it's a process of getting the company to, again, see differently, right? And part of that is actually understanding what it is to be human, because there's just very little understanding of human behavior in the way companies actually engage with their audience. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Beau, again. Now we come from science to technology to business, and now to end with, we arrive to the society and to the diffusion of technology. Leire Cancio es la directora general de Luiar Fundazioa, entonces zure txanda da, mesedez.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Beau, for your presentation. Bueno, Luiarren, zintzen eta teknologiaren gizarteratzean egiten dugu lan. Esan behar dugu, Beau bezala guk ere pertzepzioarekin nolabait egiten dugula lan. Gizarteak zientziarekiko eta teknologiarekiko duen pertzepzioa aldatu nahi dugulako alegia. Eta ez bakarrik zientziarekiko eta teknologiarekiko pertzepzioa aldatzeko lana, baizik eta horien atzean dagoen jendea edo ikertzaileak ikusgarriago bilakatzen saiatzen gara. Zuk leno aipatu duzu iScientist programa, guk ere, egia esan, aret honetan gaudenen artean, seguruna Bas Research Euskal Herrian egiten den ikerketaren webgune izango da ezagunena, gure proiektuen artean, baina arreta berezia jartzen diegu gazteei. Eta, bueno, ikerketa beraiekin batera egiten ahalegintzen gara. You mentioned iScientist program, it's a very interesting program. I have two questions. I think that you answered part of one of my question, but we all know there is a rising concern about the lack of vocations in science and research in general. And on the other hand, science perception studies, general studies show that society doesn't have much interest on science issues. Which are, in your opinion, the key factors to change that perception or reality? I mean, can anyone be a scientist? And if not, can we all look at this, or can the society look at the world more like a scientist?
Yeah, I think whenever we're playing, we're looking at the world like a scientist. If you learn how to navigate your way home, you're learning through trial and error. That's doing science. So there is a huge problem with kids' perception of science, and I think that has everything to do with how science is taught. It has nothing to do with science itself. The UK government, I don't know about here, but the UK government has just started a new curriculum. So we have an education curriculum for science education. My lab has created. The UK government, on the other hand, has created a curriculum for teaching children about science. So what does that curriculum look like? It's teaching them about discoveries of science, what science discovered in the past. That is a history lesson. That is not a science lesson. That should actually be taught in history class. It is better taught by historians than by scientists. So they take a history lesson and they call it science. No wonder kids are bored, right? Because they think science is about facts, right? And about history. The other thing for those who are actually a little bit more progressive do, so that's what the UK science curriculum looks like. And actually tomorrow I'm doing something on the BBC exactly about this question. So the better teachers actually still will teach science as a method. So you go into science class, they say, here's a question, They might even say, here's the experiment, and now the kids are supposed to follow that recipe, and if they do it well, they get the answer that they know they're supposed to get, right? If they do it badly, they get the wrong answer, right? So basically, science is cooking. It's not even being a chef, okay? So that's the problem with, no wonder children aren't interested in science. If, however, you teach science as a way of being, and that way of being is fundamental to anything that is creative, then kids will be far more interested. Where there's a space to play, to explore, to facilitate questions. The challenge with this, and I should say, possibly the iScientist program, the one who was most challenged by this was not me, but the teacher and the head of the school. Because I would go in and I'd say, I have no idea what's going to happen. Teachers don't like that. Schools don't like that. They want to know exactly what's going to happen every hour of the day. And I'd say, I have no idea, because we're doing science. In a lab, that's a good thing. In a school, that's considered to be a bad thing. So, but there can be real skills that you can teach children in how to actually ask questions and explore the answers and things like this.
Sorry, but what do we do with the general public? I mean, can we do something to improve or to change the perception of the general public?
I think so. So again, the irony is that the public sees science as a way of actually decreasing uncertainty. So the scientists will come out and they'll say, here are the answers to global warming or to a certain disease. So we're presented as the people who have the answers. We're there to decrease uncertainty. So the scientist becomes sort of the soothsayer, right? We're the replacement of the church, so to speak, right? In fact, science is there to increase uncertainty, not decrease it. That's the irony. So I think what we should do is actually go out and say, here are the brilliant questions that we should be asking, not the answers as such. Of course, there is a role for that, right? And then you engage with people in science in a different way. You create space where people can come in and not learn about science, but actually become scientists in a space that makes sense.
Eskerrik asko, lady. Thank you very much, Dr. Beau, for sharing with us your knowledge and your experience. Probably we came here with some certainties, and now we will leave with some very good questions, and that's our challenge. So we wish you the best of luck and look forward to seeing you soon again in our vast country.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah.